Welcome, everyone, to our first Conservation Connector of the year. It is February 17th, 2026. I'm Cynthia Canner, Executive Director of Prairie State Conservation Coalition. And our guest today is Jim Johannsen, who is PSEC's Vice President, coming to you today with his day job hat on as Illinois State Director of the Conservation Fund. And his topic is up on the screen, and I'm going to throw it right over to you, Jim, so you can get started on your presentation.
Thanks, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Cynthia said, I'm Illinois State Director for the Conservation Fund. I've been in this job for about a year now. I've been doing this work for about longer, or a lot longer than that. Been working to protect land for about 15 years. I live in Northwest Illinois, but I cover the entire state and sometimes other states. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more about who the Conservation Fund is and what we do. But before we do that, just a reminder, if you do have questions please drop those in the chat. Cynthia is going to be monitoring that. And then at the end of the hour, we will cover as many questions as we have time for. I have a lot of slides to get through. Luckily, about half of them are all pretty pictures and maps. So we should be able to get through them pretty quickly. So the Conservation Fund, we've been around for about 40 years. We're founded with a dual charter of land and water conservation and sustainable economic development, which is maybe a little unique among the conservation world. We operate in all 50 states and we work with all levels of government, federal, state, local, and tribal, as well as other nonprofits to help you achieve your conservation goals. As of 2025, we protected about 9 million acres across the United States, including about 27,000 acres here in Illinois. So we're a nonprofit organization. It's not immediately obvious looking at our name. We're also a land trust, which I think that some folks forget more often than we would hope. Not only are we a land trust, we're accredited by the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, meaning that we're operating at the highest professional standards for private land conservation. We also deal with all forms of real property interests. So we buy regular old land, also known as fee simple. We also deal with conservation easements, leases, everything in between. The one thing that really sets us apart from other organizations is we are rarely the ones setting the priority. Everything that we do is driven by you, our partners in conservation, working at the nonprofit and the governmental level. We swing into action if you have a priority, a piece of land that needs to get protected, and you need a little extra help doing it. We do acquire land and hold easements as needed, but every piece of land or easement that we hold, we always hold that on an interim basis. Eventually, everything that we acquire is going to be turned over to a governmental or a nonprofit partner for them to own and steward over the long term. The other kind of high level thing I want you to know about our organization is we protect everything. Some organizations are solely focused on wildlife habitat, others are solely focused on farmland or some other kind of land type. We do everything. So everything from pristine wilderness way up in northern Wisconsin to, frankly, a somewhat degraded old coal mine that uh, our partners over at the Indiana Department of Natural Resources wanted to convert into a hunting and fishing area. We also do a lot of historic and cultural preservation. This is the Eddystone Hotel down in Selma, Alabama. That is a icon of the civil rights movement. It had been recently hit and heavily damaged by a tornado. We picked it up in order to keep it from completely collapsing and losing the historic value. We work with productive farmland, and we also work on recreational lands, both in rural and urban areas. Again, if the piece of land is a priority for you, it's a priority for us. So before we go any further, I just have a quick poll that I wanted to share with you. And you can either fill out the poll by scanning that QR code on the screen using your phone, or you can click the link, which I'm about to drop in chat, if I can get my window back. All right. Well, if you need a few more seconds to finish the poll, go right ahead. Looks like the majority of the folks in the room today, a little bit more than three-quarters, maybe 80%, are working for a nonprofit organization. About a quarter of us are with the unit of government. And it looks like many of you are familiar with us. You've done work with us in the past. That's great. We always love to do new projects with repeat partners. And if you have worked with TCF in the past, it looks like many of you either received money from us in the form of a grant or we did what we call a co-op project. All right, this is really helpful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to spend about the next 40 minutes or so talking about all the different ways that the Conservation Fund can help you get your land protection done. In general, we use five unique models, at least here in Illinois. We have a sixth model, but it doesn't really, frankly, work in this state. It really only works in other states. We can talk about that offline if anyone's curious. Uh, and as I mentioned, I'm going to throw a lot of information about all of our different ways we can work with you. Uh, don't expect to remember everything. If you have questions, drop it in the chat and we'll circle back to it at the end. So our first model is kind of what we're most famous for, and it's what we call our co-op projects. Under these projects, the Conservation Fund will actually step in and acquire a piece of land, usually on the behalf of the partner who is really interested in owning it over the long term. The benefit of doing a co-op project is we can act fast. We have a real estate committee that meets every 3 weeks. We have a revolving fund that we can tap into. So if the most important property that you've been trying to buy for the last 50 or 100 years suddenly comes up for sale, and you just don't have enough time to either pull together the funding or the internal approvals you need to move forward, we can step in and serve as a bridge. We usually do our co-op model when we're working with government partners. Again, it could be federal, state, local, or tribal government. Rarely we will do co-op projects with a nonprofit partner, but we found that some of our other models tend to work a little bit better for our nonprofit partners. This is kind of the rundown of what a co-op project looks like. Again, I have an internal real estate committee that I can go to and ask for permission to buy a piece of land that meets every 3 weeks. Once I get that approval to move forward, I can go out and negotiate with the landowner, conduct due diligence, surveys, appraisals, all of that kind of fun stuff. Once we close, we're also responsible for management and stewardship of the property in the interim until we're ready to resell that piece of land to our partner for long-term ownership. At max capacity, our revolving fund is about $190 million. Remember, that's spread across the entire United States, and we do some pretty big projects. We just did, I think, a $60 million project down in Georgia. So it's not quite as simple as calling me up and telling me how much you need and when you need it. We really have to demonstrate that it's a good project, but more often than not, we are able to tap into that revolving fund and save that piece of land before it gets sold. Once in a while, we can even assist you as the partner with securing some funding to subsidize your purchase of the land from us. We're also able to sell off any excess land. So let's say there's a 500-acre property for sale, but you really only want 400 acres. You want to sell off the stuff that is lower conservation value. We can sell off the stuff you don't want while we own it. So at the end of the day, you're only getting the high quality stuff that you're interested in. A lot of our co-op projects are done on what is essentially a handshake or a non-binding written agreement. What we do need is some sort of letter of intent or an MOU that says you're interested in owning the property, you're going to buy it from us when the time comes, contingent on due diligence and everything else. We also really want to have a sense of the time frame. So if you call me up and say, Jim, I want to buy this piece of land, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it next month, next year, or 10 years from now, it's probably not going to fly. We have to have a pretty good sense of where your money's coming from to buy the land from us. We also have to have a pretty good sense of how quickly that's going to happen. And we're willing to hold property on your behalf for a year or two or three. Once we start getting above that 3 year mark, it starts to get a little bit more complicated for us. At the end of the day, if things go completely haywire and you are not able to purchase the property from the conservation fund, we always will maintain the right to sell that property to a non-conservation buyer. That happens very, very, very rarely. Remember, our mission is conservation. We're in it to get the deal done, and we're going to do everything we can to work with you to get the deal done. We just have to make sure that we're maintaining our risk appropriately, and that means maintaining the ability to sell the property to whomever if push comes to shove. I'll offer a couple of examples of co-op projects that have happened in recent history. Many of you may have heard about the Tamarack Farms project up in McHenry County. Our partner on this was the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which is working on building out their Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. It was hefty, 1,000 acres, about $16 million at the end of the day. Uh, Open Lands, local land trust based in the Chicago metro, has been the lead on building out the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. And when the Tamarack Farms deal came up, it was just a little bit bigger than what they could tackle on their own. So Open Lands approached the Conservation Fund, asked us to assist. At the end of the day, we decided that TCF was going to take the lead. So we negotiated with the seller, did all of the due diligence, all of that fun stuff that you do when we're buying land. We tapped into our revolving fund to cover the bulk of the purchase price. We also received some new funding from both Open Lands, the Illinois Audubon Society, and the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation, which unfortunately is no longer in business, as I think many of us know. Um, and we still own the bulk of the property. We're under contract to sell the entire thing over to the Fish and Wildlife Service. We sold off about 34 acres of surplus land that really nobody was interested in owning for conservation purposes. We were able to sell the first chunk to the Fish and Wildlife Service last year, and we're hoping to sell the remaining acreage within the next year or two. So fingers crossed. Here's an aerial view of the main wetland on the property. Really cool spot for migratory waterfowl. And that map over on the right side, it doesn't show everything that's happening in the area, but the Tamarack Farms property is there in blue. That green area to the north is the headwaters. No, what's it called? The North Branch Conservation Area, owned by the McHenry County Conservation District. And just a little bit to the south there is Glacial Park, really cool natural area owned by the Conservation District. One other co-op project that I'm pretty excited about that I'm happy to share with you is one that we just closed on a couple weeks ago, actually. This one takes place north of the Cheddar Curtain up in the great state of Wisconsin, and our partner is the Ho-Chunk Nation. It's about 152 acres, purchase price just a hair under $1 million, contains some globally significant cultural sites. And this is one of the rare projects where we were the initiators. Most of the time, it's you guys, the folks with the boots on the ground, that are coming to me and telling me that you need help. This is one that I saw, and I called up my colleagues at the Ho-Chunk Nation, and I said, "You guys know about this project, right? Or I'm sorry, you know about this property, right?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we know about this. We want to own it." I said, "Great, we're going to make it happen." Just like the Tamarack Farms project, we led the negotiations, contracting, due diligence, etc. And we were actually able to raise just a bit more than $1 million from some private donors to cover both the purchase price and the stewardship. Now, this is rare. I don't want folks to think that we're going to cover the entire purchase price anytime we're doing a co-op project with you. In this case, it was unique because the site is a burial ground for the ancestors of the Ho-Chunk people and some other Native American tribes. And there were some sensitivities around the idea of the nation itself purchasing that burial ground. They really felt it was more appropriate to receive it, ultimately as a donation from the Conservation Fund. And in order to do that, we raised those philanthropic dollars to make that happen. As I mentioned, we just closed a couple weeks ago. We're reaching out to some other neighbors to see if they want to get in on the action, and we'll be donating the property to the Ho-Chunk Nation within the next year or so. So this map, it doesn't really tell the story of the property quite as well as I would like, so I'm going to share this next map with you. And it's kind of hard to see what you're looking at here, but every one of those black shapes is a mound that was built about 1,000 years ago, about 125 mounds in total. Many of them are in the shape of thunderbirds. There's a handful that's in the shape of uh, what they call walkers, a panther or a bear or some other quadruped. And as far as we know, this is the largest single group of effigy mounds anywhere in the world, which I think is pretty darn cool. All right, moving on to our second model. Cynthia, if you can help me keep an eye on the clock, I would appreciate it. If we're getting low on time, just speak up and tell me
Sure.
to speed it up.
Okay.
So this next model is what we call an assist. And the main difference between an assist and a co-op is in a co-op, again, the conservation fund will actually step in and buy the land or hold the easement for a limited amount of time. On an assist, all we're doing is providing professional services. Our name never actually appears on the deed. When we're ready to close the project, the land or the easement will be conveyed directly from the seller to our partner. Um, Assists are best when you need some sort of special expertise. Maybe there's something strange about the property, like it's got mining contamination or mineral rights, or maybe it just requires a higher level of negotiation skills. We do a lot of assists with smaller groups that maybe aren't as well resourced as the Conservation Fund. And remember, too, we have a pretty robust legal team. So if there's something just a little funny, the project's too weird, too difficult, that's where we come in because we can bring that extra muscle to make it happen. Or maybe you just have too much going on and you don't have the staff capacity to make it happen. We can just simply provide that capacity support as well. We almost always do assists with our nonprofit partners. It just doesn't quite work as well for government partners. However, if you're a government partner and you think there's a reason why we should use the assist model, we're definitely open to that conversation. Just like co-ops, every assist requires that I get permission from our internal real estate committee to go after the project. Once that happens, I sign a service agreement with you, the partner, that specifies who's going to do what. Remember too that I have to cover my costs when I'm doing an assist project. So there's usually some sort of fee for service arrangement where you, the local partner, are paying us for the services provided. We can help you figure out what that looks like. We can be flexible on the amount. We can even maybe bring in some external funding to help cover that. Again, don't let the cost be a barrier. We want to try to find a way to make it work. Here's an example of a recent assist that we did that I thought was pretty cool. Our partner was Citizens for Conservation. They are a conservation land trust covering part of McHenry and I think Kane County as well. It was a pretty hefty property, about $6 million, and it was one of the largest undeveloped areas remaining in that part of the Chicago metro. So very high priority for acquisition. Citizens for Conservation at the time did not have an executive director. They had a handful of staff, but this was a pretty hefty project for them to tackle. So they called TCF for an assistance. We took the lead. We negotiated with the seller, negotiated due diligence, helped them secure some funding from the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation. And when we were ready to close, again, our name never appeared on any of the title work. The land passed directly from the seller to Citizens for Conservation. And now it's this big, beautiful property that is going to be restored to prairie and savanna and wetland. It's going to be super cool when it's done. It's already super cool, but it's going to be cooler. If you haven't been to the Hill and Dale property, highly recommend it. One other assist project is actually one that I was involved with when I was in my previous role at the Joe Davis Conservation Foundation. I had been negotiating with the landowner in my previous role at JDCF for a long time. It was this beautiful property, 120 acres with sedge meadow habitat, these rare hill prairies, and an Indian mound. And, you know, when I'm doing an easement, my first go is I always want the landowner to donate. It just wasn't in the cards for these landowners. They were older, they were on a fixed income, they couldn't just quite afford to make that happen. So JDCF went to the Conservation Fund for funding assistance. As it so happened, TCF had already secured a large bucket of funding from the USDA under something called RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. The Conservation Fund was also able to bring in some matching funds from Illinois Clean Energy. So at the end of the day, TCF's role was TCF's role was making sure that the uh, terms of the deal complied with all of the funding that TCF was bringing to the table. JDCF was the contact with the landowner. And when we went to close, again, TCF never got in the chain of title. The easement was granted directly from the landowner to JDCF. This is a photo of one of the hill prairies, really beautiful in spring with all of the pasque flowers, a lot of rare species like old-field goldenrod, lead plant, and they're working on removing all of those nasty cedars that you can see in the background. Our third model that we like to highlight is our conservation loans program. It's just like what it sounds. If you need money to close the gap on a purchase price for a piece of land, we can provide you a loan. Typically, our loans are pretty short term and they're designed to be bridge financing while you continue to fundraise to round out the purchase price. These are almost always used to solve some sort of timing issue, like we got to close this project right now, but our grant application isn't going to get approved for another 6 or 12 months, or uh, we need to close right now and we're running a capital campaign to try to raise money from our donors to cover the purchase price. That's where loans can be helpful. Again, typically we do loans with our nonprofit partners. We have done loans with government partners in the past. In fact, we just got a request to do a loan with one of our government partners in the Chicago Metro. It all just kind of depends on you. If you work for a local government, what kind of restrictions you may have in terms of taking on debt. Typically, in our loan program, we will offer a loan for up to 80% of the appraised fair market value. Less is better, obviously. We can help you prepare all of the loan application materials. Our committee meets every 3 weeks, so we can turn something around relatively quickly if time is of the essence. You, the partner, you have to come up with at least 20% as a down payment. And once that's done, it's up to you to go get the money to get the loan repaid. Typically, our loans are on the smaller side at 200K to 1 million. We will do a larger loan, but it has to be a really slam dunk project. And typically, if we're going to do a higher loan amount, it's going to be with a partner that we've done loans with multiple times in the past. So you've built up a little bit of credit with the conservation fund. And you want to come to us for a loan instead of your typical bank or credit union because almost always we're going to give you a better interest rate than whatever you're going to get from a commercial lender. Uh, it can go as low as 70% of whatever the current prime rate is. Again, a lot of that is just built into our risk assessment as the lender and your credit as potentially a repeat borrower with us. Usually, we collateralize the land that is being purchased, so we get a mortgage on the land. We're open to other forms of collateral if that's of interest to you. Again, we're flexible, it's negotiable, every deal is different. Again, too, this is all short term. We really don't want to be in a loan for longer than 3 years. Typically, 1 to 2 is what we see. And the structure of the loan is balloon, meaning you're not paying interest every month. Whenever the loan is due, we calculate the interest that is due and you pay it all in one balloon payment. This is another project that I did in my previous role when I was at the Joe Davis Conservation Foundation. This one was fun. It was about 334 acres along the Apple River, and it was sandwiched between two pieces of the state park. So it was just a natural fit that this piece of land should be added into the state park system. It was about 1.8 million, which for JDCF was at the time a pretty hefty price tag. JDCF was able to secure about 2/3 or 1.2 million of the funding needed for the purchase from grants. But that last third, they didn't have it in the bank. They didn't have a donor they could go to. So they came to the conservation fund and secured a loan for 600K. And the plan was that JDCF would immediately start work to resell the property to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And once the property was resold to the DNR, they would have the cash in hand to repay their loan. Interestingly, it just worked out well this way. The amount of income that JDCF was receiving from the annual lease of the farmland on the property was almost exactly the same amount as the interest that JDCF owed the conservation fund at the end of the deal. So JDCF was really able to do this, not having to pull any internal funding to get anything done. I don't have a great picture. This picture was taken in winter. Believe me, it's a lot more beautiful and majestic in the summer. But you can see, looking at the map, the two pieces of the state park in green on either side. It was just a natural fit. It was such an important piece. Another loan that I'm pretty excited about comes to us from Wyoming. Our partner on this one was the Grand Teton National Park Foundation. It was a 640-acre ranch, and it was the largest remaining private property within the boundaries of Grand Teton National Park. So I don't want to do the math here. 640 acres, $100 million purchase price. I don't know what the price is per acre, but that's wild. So the way this was set up is the National Park Service really wanted this ranch, but they could only get 62.5 million from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the federal funding that National Park Service uses to buy land. Their nonprofit partner, the Grand Teton National Park Foundation, was able to raise the remaining 37.5 million in donations and grants to get to that purchase price of 100 million. The problem was the deal needed to be closed by the end of 2024, but one of their donors was not going to be able to make their $5 million donation until 2025. So it was just a short-term timing issue, and the solution was relatively simple. We gave a loan to the Grand Teton National Park Foundation for $5 million bucks. They were able to, in turn, turn that money over to National Park Service so they could go to the closing table and get the ranch bought before their contract expired in 2024. And then once the Grand Teton National Park Foundation got their $5 million donation from their donor, they immediately turned around and used that donation to repay their loan from us. So this map doesn't look that impressive. Obviously, all of the green is a combination of Grand Teton National Park and the Teton National Forest. That blue square next to the orange arrow is the $100 million ranch. But just look at it, you know. I don't know if that's worth $100 million, but it's pretty darn close. All right, I think this is probably what everybody is most interested in hearing in this hour that we have together. Grants, also known as free money. Once in a while, the Conservation Fund will have a pot of money that originates from this, that, or the other thing. And our job is to get it out the door and to sink that grant money into the ground in the form of conservation projects. What sets the grant model apart from our other models is all we're doing is metaphorically writing you a check so that you can go take that money and buy a piece of land. We don't get involved in legal matters. We don't get involved in due diligence. Our name never appears on the title. We're simply a funder. We most often award grants to our nonprofit and our local government partners. The only reason that we typically don't do grant projects with state or federal government is just because the source of the grant funding that we receive is often tied to a state or local, or I'm sorry, a state or federal government. So it's hard for us to, for example, take a grant fund that we received from the federal government and then re-grant it back to the feds. It just doesn't work that way. Our role as the funder is to A, make sure that the grant funding aligns with whatever restrictions may be tied to that funding. So if the land, or I'm sorry, if the funding is restricted to Illinois, we got to make sure it's an Illinois-based project. I have to get approval internally to award that grant. We draw up a grant agreement just like you would with any other funder that you get grants from. And like most other funders will do for conservation, we have to look over your appraisal to make sure that you're not buying it for above the appraisal value. The purchase agreement, we may want to look at things like title work just to make sure the title is clean. But at the end of the day, with few exceptions, all we're doing is funding it. It's your job to find an awesome project and then let me know when you need help. Um, you're the one talking to the landowner, negotiating, doing due diligence, and as the grantee, of course, it's your job to make sure that whatever grant reports are required get turned in on time. Now, the downside to working with the Conservation Fund on our grant programs is that they're almost always fairly restricted, either to a specific geography or a specific resource. What we do more often than not is we will receive a pot of money that is used as mitigation for some specific species, like Indiana bats, northern long-eared bats. We have a pot of money right now that we're trying to find a project to benefit the Illinois chorus frog. We did a project in Michigan recently around the Massasauga rattlesnake. So you got to have a project that meets the requirements of the funding. And sometimes it's geographically constrained. Right now, there's a pot of money that we're trying to find a home for, and it has to be like right on a specific river corridor. Other times, it could be the entire state, or it could be multiple states. The short answer is it depends. Um, the number of times that I have a pot of money available to grant that aligns with your project is going to be rare, but never let that stop you from calling me and asking if I have anything available. The funding comes, the funding goes, and you just got to get in at the right time with the right project, and we'll make something happen. Yet again, this is another project that I did when I was wearing my old hat in my previous job at JDCF. We had an 80-acre property that JDCF was trying to buy. We needed cash. I don't remember all of the details, but it was somewhere just north of $500,000. And JDCF was trying to build on an existing green space corridor called Gateway Park. JDCF led all the negotiations with the landowner, everything. All TCF did was provide them with a grant to go to the table do the purchase price. And I believe that grant also included a little bit of funding for some habitat restoration. The project worked because the source of the grant funds was from mitigation for migratory birds and the federally endangered Indiana bat. And it just so happened that we had a record of an Indiana bat hibernaculum, within, half a mile or something of the project site. If we didn't have that Indiana bat record near the Gateway Park project, this never would have happened. So at the end of the day, JDCF acquired the land directly from the seller. They owned it for a little bit. Eventually, they ended up donating the land to the city of Galena. And in exchange, the city donated a conservation easement to JDCF to make sure that it would stay natural forever. Here's that big, beautiful view that all of the tourists that come to Galena every year so love. Now, as you're coming into town in the Gateway area, you see this beautiful restored prairie with all of the church steeples across the river there, instead of a strip mall, which was the other proposed use for this piece of land before we were able to protect it. One other quick highlight on a grant project, this was the Townsend Glade, very similar to Gateway Park. Natural Land Institute was working on acquiring a piece of land next to the Apple River Canyon State Park. They needed cash, same pot of money as Gateway Park. It had to have migratory bird and Indiana bat benefits. NLI bought the land, enrolled the property in the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission to ensure it was going to be perpetually protected, and then eventually sold the property to the DNR as an addition to the state park. So last but not least, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions, is our final model, which we call Farms Fund. So there's a lot going on here. I'll try to cover it quickly. What sets the Farms Fund project, or I'm sorry, the Farms Fund model apart from all of our other models is the goal is that at the end of the day, the land is going to be owned by a private farmer or farm business and operated as a farm. Typically, when we think of conservation, we think that the land is eventually going to be owned by a land trust or owned by the DNR or a local government or the federal government. Private ownership is the goal here. The secondary goal is we're trying to make sure that farmers that are trying to grow their business but are really capitally constrained can get access to farmland that is affordable. A lot of the farmers that we work with in the Farms Fund don't come from farming backgrounds. They've been farming for less than 10 years, and they want to scale up their operation. But farmland is just so darn expensive. There's no way that they can enter into the land owning market with a little bit of help. So this is how it works. It's your classic buy, protect, sell, or I'm sorry, it's a variation on your buy, protect, sell. We call it BSPS, or buy, support, protect, sell. The Conservation Fund buys a farm piece of land. The same day that we buy the land, we start leasing that farm to our farmer that we have lined up and ready to go. They're able to make some investments in the property, new wells, new buildings, new infrastructure, and they can even build a little bit of equity that way as well, the way that we structure our lease agreements. So they'll lease the land from the Conservation Fund for 3 to 5 years. In that time, the Conservation Fund is working on fundraising with our local partners to put a conservation easement on the land. Once that fundraising is all done, we will sell the land to the farmer at the value after the conservation easement is in place. So if we buy the land for $1 million, let's say, once we put the conservation easement on the land, it's going to be worth, let's just say, $700,000. In effect, the farmer is able to get the land at a 30% discount. I'm going to skip this slide since we already kind of talked about all of this. This is just a look at our National Farms Fund. It's relatively new. It's only been around for 4 or 5 years. And here locally, we're right now only working in the Chicago metro. We protected about 350 acres across 7 farms so far. And interestingly, most of the folks that we work with are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and about half of the folks that we work with are women-owned farm businesses. So there's an equity piece here as well. One project that I'm pretty excited about is our garlic escape project. This project actually came to us through our friends at the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. They knew that this 28-acre farm near their Yonder Prairie property was coming up for sale. We stepped in, bought the land from the previous seller, made some significant investments in the house on the property, which was in pretty bad shape, if I'm being honest. Same day we bought the land, we leased it to our friends at Garlic Escape. They're a small business that specializes in garlic products, as you could have guessed. And here we are 3 years later. We are fully funded for the conservation easement that's going to be granted to the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. We're just waiting for Garlic Escape to secure their mortgage so that they can fund their purchase of the land from the conservation fund. And again, Garlic Escape is able to buy the land from us at about 75% of the normal market value. And the reason that works is because we're buying the conservation easement in conjunction with the sale of the land. So the benefit to the farmer is they get access to land at a reduced rate, and the benefit to the Land Conservancy of McHenry County is they get a permanent conservation easement that buffers their Yonder Prairie complex. How cool is that? Here's just a photo of Art and Sylvia, the owners of the Garlic Escape Farm. And this map doesn't really show much, but the Garlic Escape property is outlined in blue there. All right, last project I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Our Zeldin Rust Lansing Assembly property. So this was a four-way partnership between Urban Growers Collective, which is our farming partner. They are a local nonprofit focused on urban farming in the Chicago area. Open Lands, which is our easement partner. And interestingly, the Forest Preserves of Cook County played a role in this one as well. It was about a 70-acre property for sale in the southern part of Cook County next to a new preserve that the Forest Preserves had just bought. We stepped in and bought the land in 2024. Again, same day we bought it, we started leasing the land to Urban Growers Collective so they could get in, start making soil amendments, fixing up the infrastructure and building out their business. We actually divided the property and sold the southern portion of the land to the Forest Preserves. UGC, Urban Growers Collective, wasn't really interested in either that much land, and it was kind of wet. It just wasn't that great from a farming perspective. So we're currently working to sell the remaining acreage, which is about 30-ish acres, including some really nice greenhouses, a house that they're going to use to house some of their interns. There's even a little market stand right along the road there, so you can pull over on your daily commute and buy fresh food. And we currently have all of the funding secured for the conservation easement. And all we're waiting for right now is Urban Growers Collective, our current farm tenant and future landowner, to raise the money that they need to buy the land from the conservation fund at that reduced value that we talked about. So hopefully that's going to get wrapped up in about 6 months here. Fingers crossed. Couple final thoughts before I turn it over to you. So that was a lot of information. I really, really don't expect you to retain any of it, if I'm being completely honest. What I want you to walk away with is you don't have to have all of the answers. If you have a piece of land that needs help, that needs to get protected, and you can't quite figure out how to do it on your own, call me, call one of my colleagues at TCF. We can be a thought partner. We can help you figure out how to get this done. We can help you figure out which of our models is the best fit for the project. And let's be honest, there may be projects where we are not the right partner. There may be times when we turn you over to another partner who can do the project better than we can. Um, the most important thing is you got to call us early. If you're calling me at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st saying, Jim, I need help with this project, I'm probably not going to be able to do much for you. But if you get me in early and I can be part of your brain trust, um, chances are better than 50-50 that we can find a path forward and make this work for you. So with that, I think we want to spend the last 10 minutes on some Q&A. And I see we have a couple comments in the chat, so maybe we'll start there.
Yep, sounds great. Well, we did figure out, thank you, Dan, for the cost per acre, 156,000 for that big one out in Grand Teton. Let's see, Sarah. Um, for funding that comes from TCF and is tied to mitigation dollars, does the land trust get passed on? Well, you probably can just read this too, Jim.
Yeah.
Answer it quickly.
Yeah. So the question is if you're a local partner and you get a grant from Conservation Fund that is tied to some sort of mitigation for like species or wetlands, is there some sort of restriction? The answer is yes. So, like almost every grant that you're going to receive from either a private entity like PSCC or Illinois Clean Energy, or even from the federal government, there's going to be some sort of string attached. And as the owner of the land or the holder of the easement, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to make sure that whatever strings are attached, reporting, restoration, stewardship is followed through on. Now we can assist you with that. We're not going to leave you to fend for yourself 100%, but it the I can't think of a single time where we've given a grant out with no strings attached. How many Illinois projects do we do in a typical year? So that's a good question, and I think it's a little hard to answer because we're currently working on expanding our Illinois team. For years, we were a team of one, then we were a team of two, and I think soon we're going to be a team of like five, maybe. Um, I'd say we're probably at around maybe a half dozen projects per year right now, but we're working on hiring a new field representative. So that's going to increase our capacity to take on more projects. If anybody knows of anybody who is interested in working with us as our new Great Lakes field rep and has real estate experience, I can share that information with you offline as well.
I was going to ask you to do a plug for your job opportunity, so perfect.
I'm real easy to work for. At least that's what Cynthia tells me.
I do.
Any other questions?
I have a few, but I'll go last. Anybody else? And you can come off of mute also if folks want to do it that way. Well, I'll ask a quick question if you don't see any other ones, Jim. I was interested at the beginning when you talked about you do an MOU or an LOI. Why, how does that, is that risky or how did that come about that you don't need something a little bit more secure than that?
So again, it depends on the partner. So let me share my screen one more time. Well, I'll just talk through it. So this is for our co-op projects. And again, a co-op project is where the conservation fund is actually stepping in and owning the land for the short term before the land gets turned over to you, the partner, for the long term. Um, m Most of the time, we're doing co-op projects with government partners. And just by the very nature of the way government works and what they are and are not allowed to do, a government isn't able to they are rarely able to sign a binding agreement saying, Dear Jim, if you buy this land, I promise I will buy it back from you. It's just not how they're set up. So really what that means is the conservation fund is taking on significant risk knowing that if we go out and buy this land, there's no guarantee that the government will be able to buy us out in the end of it. And the way that we mitigate that risk is by getting, at the very least, a non-binding agreement, a letter of support from your county board or your city council or the head of your agency, whatever the case may be. Now, if we can get a binding agreement, that's ideal. We're just aware of the reality that binding agreements are almost always impossible to get.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Dana. Oh, Dana wants to talk to you. He'll
All
call.
right.
I love it.
You've got my email, Dana.
Jim, how do you get funding for the stewardship that you need to do while you're holding land?
Any way we can. And it just depends, you know. I'm doing a project right now where the stewardship cost is basically zero. We just have to pay for property taxes. I'm doing another project where the stewardship cost is in the tens of thousands a year between property taxes and paying the utility bills. It just depends. And it's my job to make sure that I can cover that. It's not your job.
And as we were chatting yesterday, um, you do not have members. The Conservation Fund doesn't have members, which I thought was really interesting.
That's right. We're a nonprofit organization, but we're a non-member organization. So um, I won't go into too much detail on this, but most of our revenue that we use to pay our staff, pay our bills, pay our rent, that comes from our projects. So again, this is my job. It's not your job. It's my job to make sure that every deal that we get involved with is going to cover my staff time, my travel, our legal team's time, our finance team's time. Um, and there are many ways that we can find a way to make sure that our costs are covered, and every project is different.
And just a reminder, thank you, Jim, that Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation was mentioned a few times. And of course, you'll see their now historic logo all over the state. And Prairie State Conservation Coalition, of course, has their grant program thanks to the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation. So there's some partnership possibilities there, and we're in the middle of a couple of grant cycles right now. So it's always nice to hear their name because they were huge in Illinois for land conservation. One last quick question. How often do these special pots change?
Often.
Often? Okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
just
And
call.
again, too, it's the easy answer is it depends. You know, for years, we were trying to spend down that $20 million fund for uh, Indiana bats and migratory birds. And that the last of that $20 million was just spent. And contrast that with just a few years ago, we got like $150,000 for the Illinois chorus frog. So once that is spent, it'll stay at zero until there's another need to mitigate for that species. So again, there's no easy way to know what grant funds are available for which resources or which species. Just call me if you have a need, and I'll tell you if we have something available. Or in rare cases, if I have a fund available and I know who is working on the ground in that area, you may get a call from me saying, "Hey, so and so, I got money. You got a project?"
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Jim. Any last quick announcement on your end, Jim? And I'll just announce our next Conservation Connector.
No, take it away. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Okay.
Looking
Yes.
forward to working with all of you, either again or for the first time.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jim. That was awesome. And our next Conservation Connector will be on Tuesday, April 7th at 1 p.m. And it's going to be on the fabulous Fox Water Trail. And that is a partnership story. A couple of different partners, and including Hay and Associates. And Karen Ann Miller will be on the call, and she is the water trail goddess, in my opinion. So that'll be a really nice story about partnering to protect land and our wonderful Fox River. So thanks again for everyone for being on. And this will be on our YouTube channel. So if you want to rewatch it and look at Jim's face and his slides again, we encourage you to do that. And you'll see our playlist for Conservation Connector with our past Connector stories.